Rocking around the Christmas tree. I feel like a DJ this morning. Good morning and welcome to this month's webinar entitled Inspirational Leadership. My name is Michelle Mott, and we are delighted to have such a regular following of some people that have been joining us all through this 2017 year, as well as picking up new attendees for the first time. So for those of you who may not be familiar with our platform, let me give you just a couple of tips. On your screen, you will see in the middle of your top bar a place where you can zoom in or zoom out and watch the entire presentation in full screen mode. There's also in the middle of the platform a place where you're going to see all my PowerPoint slides. We're not going to be using any video today. And then over on the right-hand side, you'll see a column that has some different panels, of which, if you're interested in knowing the names of those that have logged in, as well as a chat box. We are going to use the chat box feature. That's a way that I can make it interactive and I can hear from you. So to get started, I also want you to jot down our phone number, our office phone number, in case you have any technical difficulties. Dana is standing by, so if you don't have all the materials we're going to be referring to, or if something happens during the course of this hour, our phone number is 515-221-2688. So let me just introduce to you those who may not be familiar with Inspiring Solutions. We've been in business now for over 25 years, working with organizations around the country on strategic planning, leadership development, which is the topic or the contents from which today's webinar is focused on, team development, hiring and onboarding, so making sure that you're making good decisions not only before hire, but once hired, how could you make sure they have a positive impression or experience? Our signature program is Attitudes in the Workplace, and we'll be talking about an upcoming certification. If you're interested in joining us, we'd love to have you. And then the last area we cover is the area of helping improve sales performance and the customer service experience. So for this hour, we're going to focus on giving you some monthly motivation. Again, whether you're watching by yourself or in many cases, we're learning that folks are pulling together a group in a training room or a conference room and using this as kind of a mini in-service. So if you've not thought about doing that, we would encourage you to take advantage of that to train more than just yourself and to give you an opportunity to learn about or exposed to one of our inspiring programs and or products. So this particular webinar, Inspirational Leadership, is going to give you an overview of a fairly new 360 feedback assessment. And what I would like to know is if any of you have ever used a 360 feedback instrument or not. So if you would, use the chat box, which again is in the upper right-hand corner. If you don't see it on your bar, you'll see a chat icon. And then you'll see off to the side a place where you can actually identify who you'd like to send that message to. And if you would, change the send to everyone or all participants, and then type in here either yes or no. Yes meaning you have had experience with a 360 instrument, or no if you have not. All right, thank you. We're hearing from Melissa and Kim that they have not. This is giving me a good indication. No, okay. Oh, Shelley has. Thank you, Shelley. All right, so what I want to do is expose you to the process itself. This particular assessment tool identifies 8 different approaches to leadership, what the results might look like that you will have filled out as the leader or as the person who wants the feedback, as well as the format for others to getting that information, what your greatest strengths are from the results, and then what makes this what's called a 363 feedback is the extra 3 strategies that are identified based on the results for your future development. So let's go ahead and get started. For a basic understanding of the tool, we wanted to have 3 pieces of information. So attached to the instructions of the webinar, you'll have received a sample of a Everything Disc 363 for Leaders profile. We're going to be taking a look at what Taylor Meyer learned. There's also a brochure that describes a little bit more about the tool or the resource. And then we always give you the upcoming webinar schedule. And so since we are on the final month of the year, we've got our 2018 webinar flyer. Now, after we're finished and we sign off, you'll be asked to fill out a brief survey, and we welcome any comments, suggestions for improvement, as well as topics, because we continually refine our process based on feedback from past webinars. So one of those being the webinar schedule. Many of you may know that we repeat this twice each month. So we're going to be repeating the same webinar again at 10:30. So if there's anyone that you know that wasn't able to join us for this hour, feel free to pass them along the invitation. Do reach out to us because the login is different, but we appreciate you guys passing the schedule along to any coworkers or friends or other clients that might also benefit from this monthly motivation. So to start the inspirational leadership concept, I chose this as an opening quote from Andy Stanley from Smart Leadership. Leaders don't listen. Leaders who don't listen, too bad I can't read this morning, leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. And let me give you a little bit of background about my use with 360 instruments. I have found that depending on the trust level of the employees or the culture of the organization does tend to dictate how honest people will be in giving feedback. For instance, if there is a fear of retaliation or if there is a fear of retribution for giving honest feedback, the leader or whoever's seeking the feedback may not get accurate or honest feedback. So I always tell people, if you have a very consistent response or maybe an inflated response, that's probably an indication that people were intimidated to give you what they really felt. Or if you had a low turnout, so many organizations that do this throughout all of the leaders of the organization have a lower response rate. That again might be a sign that you are intimidating or there is a fear or lack of trust. So let's use the premise that you are an organization or you are a leader who has a fairly healthy relationship with those who you work with. 360 feedback is a professional feedback opportunity that allows a group of coworkers to provide feedback on an employee's performance. Now, typically, as I mentioned, this feedback is given to managers. So a lot of times those of you, and I guess another yes-no question would be, how many of you are leaders or would be responsible for leadership development? If you again would type in the chat box and send to all participants either a yes or a no based on you being a leader or responsible for leadership development. All right, so we've got Roberta, thank you, coming in as a yes. I'm assuming that many of you probably sought out this title, Inspirational Leadership, either because you are a leader, and again, I want to make sure that you all know that leaders don't have to have that in their title. In other words, you may or may not have any direct reports, and that's okay. This tool can be used whether you have or do not have direct reports, and we'll be talking about that here in a minute. All right, well, thank you, Melissa and Amanda. Another use of this tool is not necessarily for performance reviews, although I have found that a lot of best practices integrate this into the performance management process. Annual performance reviews tend to focus on job goals and their productivity, whereas this particular instrument focuses primarily on the skill of a leader and strategies that can make them more effective. The process that we use is to, first of all, work with an organization and have for each leader or leadership to identify a variety of raters. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we use to define raters. So the raters are identified for each leader, and the minimum is 3. So typically we say that you have to have your boss, unless you're the boss, and in that case you might have a board of directors that could be, in fact, who you get feedback from, and then at least 2 other people. So whether it's direct reports, or if you don't have direct reports, it could be your peers. And I'm just going to give an example because Dana's recently done this for one of our clients. What she'll do is ask you to provide her with a listing of all those that are going to be rating each leader. And then each leader will be given or sent an email that will have a link to complete a 2-part assessment. The first section has questions about that particular leader's behavior. And then what we also like about this particular tool we've selected is, what would you like this person to be better at? So not only does it describe how they're currently doing, but it also gives you a priority of what would matter most to those giving the feedback. Then the leader themselves, or himself or herself, is also given the link. So you also have a chance to get a self-assessment of how you perceive yourself as a leader. And in your list of questions, there's information about not only your leadership behaviors, but also from a everything DISC behavioral. Now, some of you that have already filled out an everything DISC profile, whether it be workplace or management or sales or customer service, some of that language might be familiar, but it's a great way to introduce to you everything DISC if you're not familiar with it. As I mentioned, we do recommend that you select at least 3 people to rate you as a leader. Leaders are then assigned to one of 4 categories. You don't have to use all 4 categories. However, for instance, we recommend that you have your manager fill it out, and that typically is the 1 manager, unless you have 2 people, but you have to have at least 1 manager. And then the other one that you would have at a minimum would be a peer. So a peer could be one of your fellow coworkers, someone who's on your leadership team, or another department manager, or whatever you might call a fellow peer. Then for those of you that are leaders that have a direct report, you'd have to have at least 2 direct reports if you have any. There's no limit to the number, but you do have to have at least 2 direct reports. And then if you also like to have some other people that you work with, maybe you don't have peers, but maybe you serve people in other departments. For instance, let's say that I'm a leader in the human resource department, and I don't have peers per se, but I'm serving a lot of people throughout the organization. So I could pick and choose a variety of what I'd consider my customers. So that's a way that you could use other category. Once you've done that, we now want to explore what the actual profile itself might look like. So if you've printed it out, great, you can follow along. If you did not print it out, or if you're listening in, I'm going to give you a walkthrough of the pages of this 363 Leader's Profile. This particular assessment will help you understand how you see yourself as a leader. It's going to explore 8 different approaches to leadership and what your tendencies are for those. And then one of the things it's going to pull out from the feedback that you gave, as well as what the raters gave you, 3 personalized or customized strategies to becoming a more effective leader. So let's go ahead and turn to page 2 for those that are following along. On page 2, you'll see an overview of the value of this 363 instrument, giving you the cornerstone principles that says that leaders can be influenced by a variety of different factors, such as your character, life experiences, cognitive abilities, and even your maturity. It doesn't matter if you're a brand new leader or if you're an experienced leader. This particular assessment will help you understand yourself, because that is truly the first step in becoming a more effective leader. One of the things that you'll see on this page are the 8 approaches. And I just want to give you an overview of them: pioneering, energizing, affirming, inclusive, humble, deliberate, resolute, and commanding. As a leader, new or experienced, you demonstrate each of these different approaches to some degree. And it's this instrument that's going to help you receive feedback on how effective you and others feel you are in these different behaviors. So let's take a look at page 3. As I mentioned, we're taking a look at a sample result from a gentleman named Taylor Meyer. And so if you've had a chance to look through this, I'm not going to read through it, but this would give Taylor some very specific, customized feedback as to how he is as a leader. It says he's probably a dynamic leader who pushes himself. And on any given day, he might want or seek freedom to set your own course as a leader. And because he has an ambitious approach as a leader, his style tends to attract a more high profile assignments. So again, it's customized specifically to that leader based on his or her results along the raters. Let's go ahead and now move to page 4. This is a great introduction to the 8 approaches. And for each of the approaches, there are 3 practices. So I want to kind of give you the overall understanding of the 8 practices or approaches before we dig deeper into the practices. So let's take a look at the definition of each. On page 5 is how each rater sees you. So you'll see again, using the circle of the 8 approaches, how the raters saw you using a point on the graph. And the further out you are in this map, the more often your raters see you using that approach. So as you can see at a glance, Taylor is perceived as using a variety of all 8 approaches. At the bottom of that page, you'll see a definition of those 8 approaches. These are the behaviors that research has found of successful leaders. So let me give you a working definition of them. First of all, the pioneering leader. This particular leader encourages the group to think creatively about their options and take chances on new opportunities. So when you think about working in an environment where coming up with new solutions or solving problems, this leader would bring about that creativity of others. The energizing leader. When you think about yourself in motivating or managing others, think of your ability to build enthusiasm for the group's goal and develops a wide network of professional connections. So that can be within your organization or it can also be outside your organization. But this particular leader is able to get people excited about whatever the team or group's goal is. The affirming leader is one who is approachable. And when I think about someone who's approachable, their door is open. For, in other words, they are one that someone trusts to come with their concerns or shares information in confidence, but is also willing to celebrate the victories or successes of others. And because of their style of leadership, they help people feel good about their environment and their contributions. The 4th type of leader is referred to as an inclusive leader. This, I think of collaboration is another way of thinking of this inclusive leader. They tend to get a variety of people involved in the decision-making process, and they show concern or a genuine interest in the opinions and feelings of other people. So they want to make sure that people have a voice or have an input into decisions that are being made. The fifth type of leader is that of being humble. And I chose these group of penguins because I thought their expression was one where they may not necessarily be the most vibrant, but they maintain a modest, composed demeanor and can be relied upon to make decisions fairly. And again, think of in terms of demonstrating a variety of these approaches as a leader. The sixth approach to leadership is being deliberate. This is when a leader provides a sense of stability for the group by communicating clearly and ensuring that decisions are made carefully. So I would see that there'd be a lot of two-way communication, lots of not only sharing of information, but also of good questions being asked. The seventh approach to leadership is the resolute leader. This leader has high standards, not only for themselves, but from their group or their team, and they insist on using methodology or methods that can maximize efficiency. So they're looking for ways that everyone or that the team can use to not only provide consistency for the customer's experience, but also to assure guaranteed excellent performance. And then the last approach is the commanding leader. This particular leader is one who's willing to take charge of the situation with confidence and urges others to get results. So to me, that would mean that the leader is not only mature, but with confidence is fairly comfortable taking risks, calculated risks. So as you see yourself, many of you might think of yourself in many of those different descriptions, and that would be reflected in this assessment tool. So let's take a look at page 6. On page 6, now we're going to be taking a look at some big picture feedback. At a glance, what this page does is it takes not only how your group rated you, but it adds a dotted line that illustrates how you rated yourself. And you can see the key off to the right side of this chart that indicates such. So as you can see that Taylor sees himself as being a little bit stronger in leadership approaches than his team does. So this would give him a good opportunity to perhaps learn about the why. Why did his raters see himself the way they did? And one of the benefits of using a 360-degree feedback is to have that language. And one of the things that this particular assessment tool will not only give you definitions, but it'll also point out at the bottom of page 6 some things that he might want to ask or pursue to learn more specific information from his raters or from those who gave him feedback. On page 7, this would break down, and again, it may not have all 4 categories because we said earlier that you don't have to have all 4 categories utilized, but we would recommend at a minimum that you have your manager, whoever your boss would be, and so because that person would be the only person most likely that would fill that out, you would know specifically what he or she said, and hopefully you have a good enough, again, relationship with your boss or your manager that they would feel comfortable giving you feedback. After all, they're the one who gives you your performance review. And then the other 3 categories would include, in this example, Taylor had 6 peers. So that means that he had 6 people that work alongside him. He also had 10 direct reports. Not sure if that was 100% of all those that were asked. One thing that this does not indicate is if you had all of those that were given the opportunity. So maybe he had more direct reports. So maybe he only had 10 of his 15 direct reports. So that would be, I guess, a concern from my perspective, if I was coaching him, to say that why do you think not everyone gave you feedback? Now, I would also coach him to not necessarily drill down and find out who did not, because that again creates that intimidating environment, because you don't want to, if they want to voluntarily say I did or I did not, that's fine. But I think it can create an intimidating or a fear of retaliation if you're set out to identify who did or who did not fill out the assessment tool. And then the last category would be those that he identified or labeled as others. And as I mentioned, others could be those whom he serves. They could be people that he works with on a regular basis. They don't necessarily fit into the other categories. So once again, you can get an idea of how different those different categories sees him. Then starting on page 8, there are detailed feedback, and I know it's a lot of information, so I'm going to keep it kind of at a high level for you to understand those. But what it does for each of those 8 approaches is it digs deeper into the 3 what's called practices for what each person said. And so there is a legend at the bottom. So let's take a look at, for instance, page 8. The first part of each of these pages highlights an understanding of that particular approach. So this first of 8 approaches, being pioneering, says that you tend to rate yourself a little higher on the approach than your raters do. There's only a moderate amount of agreement amongst those who rated you, so you'll see that there's a deviation between the different raters. That's what those symbols are, the square, the circle, those that are filled in, the triangle, the diamond shaped. And then it also says, as part of this highlight, that your manager thinks that your approach more often than your raters think you do. So again, it kind of gives some conclusions that he might want to be aware of. Then at the bottom of the page, you'll see that the legend indicates the circle without anything filled in is how he saw himself. The filled-in circle is the manager's feedback. The square is the feedback that the peer group gave him. The triangle are those that are his direct reports. And then finally, the diamond shape are those that fit into the others category. So you'll see for each of the 3 practices a general description of what it is. So in other words, the first one is finding opportunities. And then underneath that, what the comments are. And so we're going to talk about that for a minute. As you look at the 3 approaches to pioneering, finding opportunities means that you are often great at finding new opportunities and direction for the group, and others may admire their ability to uncover new possibilities. Then underneath that practice, you'll see some smart comments. And smart comments are comments that are not written in, but they are given to the raters to select. And the reason that that's important is that you can see that it's quantified off to each comment. So for instance, the first comment under finding opportunities talks about his passion for finding new opportunities encourages the rest of us to show initiative. Just to make sure that you're following along, I'm going to give you a little quiz. How many raters felt that was true? And on the chat box, if you would, type in the number that's in parentheses after that comment. And I just want to make sure that you're following along. Again, for those of you who are not looking at the contents, obviously I'm not expecting a response. Should have this as a contest. Who can write in first? How many raters felt that way, that gave that comment? We're looking at page 8, studying the pioneering approach and the first of the 3 practices, finding opportunities. All right. I see 12. That is correct. Who was that? Amanda. Awesome. Congratulations. That is the correct answer. So I want to help you to understand that there's a lot of information that's we're not going to be able to go through this, but I at least wanted you to understand how you can drill down for each of the 3 different practices in each of the 8 approaches. So the next one talks about stretching the boundaries. The definition of stretching the boundaries means that the pioneering leaders challenge the group to push beyond their comfort zones, and others may appreciate that they help the group envision a new way of doing things. You know, I think of one of the things that hopefully Dana feels. I have been stretching her capacity to take on some new responsibilities, not only in managing our webinar process, but she's learning how to maintain and manage our website. So that is probably stretching her boundaries, and she might even chime in on that one, from a perspective of helping her learn new ways of doing things. And then the third practice for pioneering is what's called promoting bold action. Pioneering leaders, again, by definition, encourage leaders to take bold action, people to take bold action, and others may appreciate that they're willing to take chances that could broaden the group's horizons. I think of that is, as a leader, are you encouraging your team or your department or your unit to do things differently? You know, break old habits. This is a great time of year where you're thinking about what worked in 2017 and in what ways might you want to do things or start things or try something new for the new year. So that explains how those next pages work. I'm not going to go through the remaining pages or not that all pages, but the next section in as much detail, but I do want to introduce the three different practices for the different types of approaches. So on page 9, the three approaches for an energizing leader is one who shows enthusiasm, they build professional networks, and they rally people to achieve goals. The practices of an affirming leader, again, page 10, are those that are approachable. They acknowledge their team members' contributions with a thank you or congratulations, and as a result, they create a positive environment. Page 11 are the three approaches to an inclusive leader. They are one who stays open to input. They seek feedback. They are able to show diplomacy. They are willing to open communication and appreciate people's concerns for their feelings. And they're good at facilitating, which means they're aware of the feedback, they're aware of the concerns, not only from observing what people are saying, but what perhaps even some body language. They're a skilled facilitator. The three approaches to a humble leader on page 12 describes those that are able to maintain composure. They show modesty. It's not always about the leader. In fact, just the opposite. Oftentimes, a humble leader realizes that their success is based on their team's performance, and they keep an open mind or make decisions fair-mindedly. And then the deliberate leader, there on page 13, is one who is able to communicate with clarity so that everyone understands what he or she is referring to, promotes disciplined analysis, so they're able to balance the gut reaction as well as the facts in making good decisions, and has the ability to provide a sense of stability. One of the things that is important in today's workplace is a sense of stability. Now, knowing how much an organization and our industries are changing these days, that can cause a lot of unrest. So this leader, although as much as he or she wants to instill innovation and promotes change, also has the ability to provide that sense of stability in the workplace. The next three practices is that of a resolute leader on page 14. He or she sets high standards and expectations for himself and others. They are willing to bring up and speak and resolve problems or resolve conflict, and are able to improve methods to prevent future problems or conflict. And then the last approach of the 8 is that of a commanding approach, page 15. The practices that this particular leader does is willing to show confidence. They can take charge of a situation or of a team, and knows and understands what the results are and can help keep the team focused. on those priorities. So if you were to think about your understanding of a leader, which of the approaches do you feel would be your strengths? Let's have you write again or type in the chat box, which of the 8 approaches do you feel seem to resonate both with you? And I'm going to just pick this last one as commanding from myself. Oftentimes I tend to probably have too much confidence, as Dana will say, that I sometimes will take on things without perhaps, for instance, concern for the risk, but I'm not risk averse. I'm not afraid to take charge. And I always want to think about working smarter, not harder. All right, so we've got some coming in. Thanks, Helen. Inclusive. Amanda, also commanding. Roberta, thank you. Oop, we've got some coming in. Humble. We've got truthfully. I'm a little bit of all of them, Kim, and that is so true. Everyone is a degree of those. Affirming, Jolene. Great. Thank you. So by filling out the assessment tool, you'll actually get not only your self-assessment, but you'll also be identified by your raters. So on page 16, if you're following along, this actually indicates from the rater's perspective how they saw your strengths. So in the example that we're looking at, Taylor Myers, the 3 strengths that his raters saw him as being approachable, showing confidence, and taking charge. And you'll see that there is some narration. The 3 areas that he should focus in on, at the bottom of that page, I'll give you the definition of what that means, and it's further defined on page 17 through 19. We suggest to help you improve your effectiveness is to not only continue to build on your strengths, but to take a 3-step approach for your development. Discover why a particular practice was chosen for you. It could have been based on the ratings. It could have been based on the comments. Second step would be then to personalize the statements that were given to you in this assessment that you feel best describe you, so you don't have to agree with everything. Maybe it's a heightened awareness of ways that people are perceiving you in ways that you don't perceive yourself. And then it also provides some strategies or tips to improve your effectiveness. So if you are not in congruence, or if you're not aligned with your raters, whether it be your manager, your peers, or your direct reports, you can actually develop an action plan to help you become more effective. So if you take a look at page 17, you'll see that for the first area of development, you are asked to identify what are those that are the responses. So for those that said yes, a lot more, yes, a little more, no, for a total of his 23 raters. So it's giving you an idea of what needs to be, and for this particular area, he's referring to showing diplomacy. So the 3 areas that were identified on the next pages, one was showing diplomacy, the second one was communicating with clarity, and then staying open to input. So on each of the pages, you are suggested to use a pen or a highlighter and go through and put a check mark next to things that you tend to agree with, things that maybe you disagree with, an X, and maybe there's an area or 2 that you want more information, and you can put a question mark or circle that to get more information. So Taylor can go through each of those pages and take a look at what is being recommended for improving his effectiveness as a leader. Before I move on, let me stop and ask, are there any questions? And if you have any questions at any time, feel free to type them into the chat box. The appendix is a lot of information, and for those of you who love data and the research, you'll probably spend a lot of time in this area. What I want to do is teach you how to use or understand this information. So the appendix is made up of 2 blocks of information. There are 3 pages dedicated to a summary of all of the different approaches and the practices. And you can drill down to each of those. And then the last section are those that will give you some comments so you can understand more about the behaviors. So let's take a look, first of all, at how to read the data summary. These are pages 20 through 22. As I mentioned, these pages drill down to the behaviors of each of the 3 practices within each of the 8 approaches. It's rated on a 7-point scale, so the higher the number, the better people feel you are in demonstrating those behaviors. And you can see at the top, it does list them by rater groups. So the first is all the raters. The next is your column, or the self-assessment. The third column is that of the manager. The next is the group of peers. The next is the group of direct reports. And then the last column is the group of those identified as others. So you can drill down by different approaches, different practices by groups. So you can slice and dice it however you want to. What's also interesting that I think makes this particular 360 feedback assessment different or better than the others that are out there in the market is this last column. This tool does a great job of not just asking for a snapshot of your effectiveness, but goes one step further and says, what would you like to see improved more often? So on that last column, you'll see the percent. So for instance, 22% feel that they would like to see Taylor use his pioneering skills, 26 stretching the boundaries. So that again gives valuable insights to him. Then the last part of this appendix, you want to skip over if you're following along to those pages 23 through 26. This uses what's called Comment Smart to quantify additional information from what the raters have said. So Comment Smart is a research-based, innovative, selective tool that when the raters complete the assessment, they can select particular comments that can be quantified that gives richness, context, and depth to feedback without potential for snide remarks. Another concern that I've had when you have an open-ended 360-degree instrument, which means that they can actually write in comments, a lot of times people don't know how to give constructive feedback. And this allows them to basically pick and choose as a multiple choice what kind of additional comments that you'd like to add. It's not required, but for those that would like to give additional comments, they can check mark, and then this particular section in the appendix tells you how many of the different raters gave such comments. So for instance, if you're looking at page 23, the first section on pioneering, you'll see at a glance that 12 people checked that he has underneath the finding opportunities, passion for finding new opportunities encourages the rest of us to show initiative. So that affirms what the raters are seeing as his behavior for finding opportunities. So you can see that this really digs deep into the behaviors. So I know I covered that profile at a high level. What's really interesting is to find out what you learn about yourself and your raters using this tool. So if you are interested in learning how to use this 363 for leaders information, another attachment that we sent to you was a brochure. The brochure gives you, again, an information about why or how 363 is different than other 360 feedback assessment tools in that it not only asks for yourself but others to give you feedback. It then takes that information and applies it to a particular action plan with the 3 areas for your development, based on what people would like to see to be more effective. There are other reports that are available with this, what we call suite or family of 360 instruments. We did not give you this. We didn't want to overwhelm you, but if you're interested, feel free to either write that in the comments of your evaluation for today, or if you want to call or email us, Dana will be happy to send that out to you. There is what's called the 363 Coaching Supplement. If, for instance, you wanted to use this tool and wanted me, or if you have someone in your organization, to serve as a coach to the leaders, this then is a good tool or is a supplement for the coach to get additional information about the leader. It introduces the DISC style. It also looks at the 24 practices ranked by ratings, so there's a degree of prioritization. And then it also takes a look at a normative comparison. Now, we're not saying this tool could only be used by a coach. What's nice about this tool is it's no cost. So once you have completed an assessment tool, if you would like us to send you this coaching complimentary, it will give you normative data, which means it takes a look at, and I know this might be hard for you to read, but it gives you a comparison of how in the database you would compare with others. The other type of report is a facilitator group report. So let's say that you are responsible for leadership development in your area or in your organization, and you ask all leaders, it's not just one or two leaders, to fill this out, which can be done, but let's say as an organization you want all leaders to complete this process, which again is nice because you have a benchmark. You can kind of identify how your leaders compare to one another. In the facilitator group report, you can see on the left column how each of the leaders illustrate. So as a facilitator, or if you're the, and you can by definitely share this with all the leaders. They can see at a glance what the map of each of the leaders are. And then on the right column, you can also see at a glance the areas of this group of leaders' strengths as well as their areas for development. So in other words, it gives you an idea of how the group as an overall. Oh, and Helen, thank you. I see that Helen has asked for the complimentary or the sample of the coaching supplement. So maybe here's what we could do. We'll go ahead and as a part of the follow-up to this, Dana, could you send a sample of the coaching supplement and the facilitator report? And I'll ask her to chime in if she would, please. Now the cost, which is always usually the question, the cost of the Everything DISC 363 for Leaders Profile is currently $200. And I say that because we are going to experience a price increase, and that's only because it's costing us more after January 1st. We never increase our costs unless our costs increase. So I think Dana has sent out reminders that all of our products are Everything DISC, Workplace, anyone interested in Epic credits, this would be a great time before the end of the year to stock up, because even if you don't want to use the profile right away, we can send them off to you before end of year, and you could administer them at any point in time because the links do not or will not expire. Something else that I want you to know is that it doesn't matter how many people you have rate each leader. So the price is the same whether you have the minimum of 3 people rating one leader, and maybe you have one leader that has 20 people that you want to rate because they have a lot of direct reports, they want to have some peers. So the cost does not change, but you can have a variety of different number of raters, and there is no limit to the number of raters. As I mentioned, the coaching supplement is no charge, so that can be something that you give to each of the leaders as well. And then again, if you are going to do this for a group, I would suggest that you generate a group report, and that is just one cost for the entire group. So it's not whether there's 5 or 10 people in your group. It's just a one-time group report. Again, you can see where the prices will go up after the first of the year. So I would encourage you, if you are even considering it, for something to do either short-term between now and the end of the year, or something you want to do next year. We'll be happy to walk and talk you through it. I've seen Dana and I've heard Dana talking with clients over the phone about how to administer this, so she will hold your hand and walk you through this. If you do have any additional questions, please reach out to us. We're happy to go as fast or as slow with this process, but we find that it's extremely valuable for your individual as well as your group leaders' effectiveness. So in closing, I always like to give you not only an opening but a closing quote, and this from John Maxwell, that says that leaders must be close enough to relate to others but far enough ahead to motivate them. And when I think about using a 360 feedback, that really takes that blend of having the trust and confidence that people will give you honest feedback, as well as being a leader who can foresee what's coming down the road in the future. So I want to leave you with a preview of our upcoming webinars. As I mentioned, next month we're going to be certifying another group of people for our attitudes in the workplace. We have a couple more openings, so if you would like to join us, I encourage you to act before December 25th. You'll save on the registration, goes up again after that time, $595, and we'll talk a little bit about what that has included. We're also going to do our monthly webinars, January 19th, on strategic planning. This is a great time of year to think about what did you learn from this past year, what do you want to focus in on in the future year, whether you are a leader or a business leader, whether you just want to do some strategic planning on your own, this topic would be appropriate. And then in February, we're going to introduce a new product using confidence with conflict. As I mentioned, last year we did 2 certifications. This year we're just going to do 1. So if you are interested in getting certified to teach either staying positive in a negative world or bad apples, dealing with difficult attitudes, we have 2 online certification dates. And I shouldn't say that there's 2 dates. 2 different sessions. It's actually 2 times in which the certification will occur, 8:30 to 11:30 on both January 18th and the 25th. So if you're interested, mark on today's evaluations and we'll follow up with you for more information or to get you registered. And you can register out on our website, not only for this certification, but at any time on our webinars, and I know a lot of you have done so. So since this particular webinar was on getting feedback as a leader, I want to also practice what I preach. Your feedback does matter. So when you close out of this webinar, you'll be asked to fill out a brief survey, and please do so. We appreciate and applaud your honest comments or suggestions for future topics. And this being our final webinar for the year, I want to not only thank you for joining us, but I want to wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas and nothing but the best for a Happy New Year. So until then, Happy New Year, and I look forward to working with you again in the new year.